Most people believe dangerous fat is the kind they can see. The soft weight around the waist, the tighter fit of a shirt, the number slowly rising on a scale. But some of the most harmful fat in the human body is completely invisible. It grows quietly, deep inside the abdomen, filling the spaces between organs that were never designed to store it. This is visceral fat, biologically active tissue that behaves less like stored energy and more like a chemical organ. Unlike the fat beneath your skin, visceral fat wraps itself around structures that keep you alive: your liver, your intestines, your pancreas, even the vessels supplying your heart. And here is what makes doctors uneasy. Many people carrying dangerous amounts look relatively normal. No dramatic warning signs, no immediate pain, often no idea it is happening. Researchers sometimes refer to it as the fat you don't feel, until your body begins to fail quietly. Because visceral fat does not just sit there. It releases inflammatory molecules directly into the bloodstream, altering hormones, interfering with insulin, and forcing vital organs to function under constant biological stress. Think of it less like padding and more like pressure. Slow, persistent, internal pressure. What concerns physicians is not just how common it has become, but how early it begins, accumulating, sometimes years before routine blood tests show anything abnormal, which raises an uncomfortable question. If you can't feel it, and often can't see it, how does this fat actually begin surrounding your organs in the first place? Because the process is far more deliberate and far more strategic than most people realize. And what happens next is where doctors start paying very close attention. The human body is remarkably organized. Under normal conditions, excess energy is stored just beneath the skin, what medicine calls subcutaneous fat. It is not harmless, but it is metabolically calmer, more stable, less intrusive. Visceral fat is different. It appears when the body begins running out of safer places to store surplus energy. At first, this shift is subtle. A slight expansion behind the abdominal wall, fat cells enlarging in spaces you cannot touch, organs adjusting millimeters at a time. Nothing dramatic, but biologically, something important has changed. Instead of acting like passive storage, these deeper fat cells become chemically active. They start releasing signaling proteins, inflammatory messengers that travel directly to the liver through the portal vein. This is not random placement. It is strategic proximity. When fat surrounds the liver, the body's metabolic control center begins receiving distorted signals about how much energy is available. The liver may respond by producing more glucose, even when you do not need it. Over time, this can quietly push the body toward insulin resistance, a state physicians often detect long before diabetes appears. What makes this especially deceptive is the timeline. Visceral fat tends to accumulate slowly, sometimes across years of mild habits rather than obvious extremes, slightly shortened sleep, chronic stress hormones remaining elevated, frequent high-calorie convenience foods, long hours of sitting. Individually, they seem manageable. Together, they reshape internal biology. There is a saying in preventive medicine: the body keeps an accurate record even when the mirror does not. And this is why some individuals first discover high visceral fat during routine scans, despite never considering themselves at risk. But storage is only the beginning, because once fat starts pressing against organs, the environment inside your abdomen begins to change. And what doctors observe next is not simply weight gain. It is a shift in how those organs are able to function at all. Especially one organ that is far more sensitive to this pressure than most people realize. Among all abdominal organs, the liver is uniquely exposed. It sits at a metabolic crossroads, filtering blood, regulating nutrients, neutralizing toxins, and helping stabilize energy across the entire body. When visceral fat begins surrounding it, the effect is not immediate pain. It is mechanical, chemical, gradual. Fat cells release free fatty acids directly into the liver's circulation. Over time, tiny droplets begin accumulating inside liver cells themselves, a condition physicians call non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Despite the name, this has nothing to do with alcohol for many patients. It is increasingly detected in people who feel perfectly functional. No sharp symptoms, no dramatic warning, often normal daily life. Yet internally, the liver becomes slightly enlarged, slightly heavier, slightly less efficient at performing the hundreds of tasks that quietly keep you alive. Doctors sometimes describe the early phase as metabolic friction. Nothing appears broken, but everything requires more effort. Blood sugar becomes harder to regulate. Triglycerides may climb. Energy fluctuations feel more noticeable, though easy to blame on sleep or stress. And because the liver contains very few pain-sensitive nerves, it rarely protests early. One hepatology professor once summarized it with unsettling precision: the liver suffers in silence. What concerns specialists is progression. If inflammatory signals persist, simple fat accumulation can evolve into cellular irritation, then scarring, gradually altering the architecture of the organ. Still, many people feel nothing, which leads to a dangerous assumption. If something were wrong, I would know. But visceral fat does not rely on sensation to cause damage. It alters physiology quietly until other systems begin responding. And one of the first systems forced to adapt is not the liver, but the one regulating your blood sugar every minute of the day. Because when fat presses close to the pancreas, the consequences become far more systemic than most people expect. Tucked behind the stomach, the pancreas operates with extraordinary precision. Its primary task sounds simple: release insulin when glucose rises, but the timing must be nearly perfect. Even small disruptions force the body into compensation. Visceral fat interferes with that precision. Inflammatory chemicals drifting through nearby circulation begin dulling the body's response to insulin. In reaction, the pancreas works harder, releasing more, trying to maintain balance. For a while it succeeds. Blood sugar may still appear normal. Energy may feel unchanged. But internally, the workload has increased. Physicians sometimes call this metabolic overdrive, an invisible phase where the pancreas is keeping problems hidden through sheer effort. The concern is duration. Cells cannot overperform forever. Gradually, responsiveness declines, and the body edges toward type 2 diabetes, often after years of silence. What makes visceral fat particularly deceptive is this buffering period. People assume stability means safety. Biology disagrees, because once regulation begins slipping, the effects ripple outward, influencing circulation, vascular tension, even cardiac workload. And the next organ to feel that shift is the one that never truly rests. Even for a second, the heart does not require direct contact with visceral fat to be affected. It only needs the bloodstream. As inflammatory molecules circulate, blood vessels gradually lose some of their natural elasticity. They become slightly stiffer, slightly narrower, forcing the heart to generate more pressure just to maintain normal flow. At first, the adjustment is microscopic, a few additional beats per minute, a subtle rise in vascular resistance, nothing you would ever perceive. But cardiologists pay close attention to this phase, because it often overlaps with the early development of atherosclerosis, the quiet thickening of arterial walls. Not dramatic, not sudden, just progressive. There is a principle in cardiovascular medicine: risk accumulates silently long before symptoms announce it. Visceral fat accelerates that accumulation by sustaining a low-grade inflammatory state, a kind the body can tolerate, until it cannot. What unsettles many specialists is how frequently this pattern appears in people who still consider themselves relatively healthy. No alarming fatigue, no clear limitation, just physiology adapting behind the scenes. But the body is not designed for endless adaptation. Eventually it begins sending signals. They are rarely loud, often misinterpreted, easy to dismiss as modern life. Yet once you recognize them, they become difficult to ignore, because the final stage of visceral fat is not defined by what you feel, but by the warnings most people overlook until doctors point them out. Visceral fat rarely announces itself. Instead, the body communicates in quieter ways, small physiological shifts that seem unrelated until they are viewed together. Waistlines expand, even when weight appears stable. Blood pressure trends slightly higher during routine visits. Fasting glucose edges upward, still normal, but no longer optimal. Fatigue lingers longer than it once did. None of these feel urgent. That is precisely why they matter. Clinicians often focus less on dramatic symptoms and more on patterns, because visceral fat is not defined by a single moment of danger, but by trajectory, where the body is heading. One widely used measurement is waist circumference. sometimes a stronger predictor of metabolic risk than weight alone. It reflects something deeper than appearance, the growing presence of fat packed between organs. The reassuring reality is this: visceral fat is also one of the most responsive fat types the human body carries. When sleep stabilizes, when daily movement increases, when ultra-processed foods become less frequent, the body often begins reducing it faster than people expect, not overnight, but measurably. Preventive medicine is built on this idea. The earlier the shift, the quieter the correction. Because the true danger of visceral fat is not that it exists. It is that most people live with it for years without realizing their biology has been gradually recalibrating. So the next time health is measured only by the mirror, it may be worth remembering some of the most important changes in the human body are the ones you were never meant to feel.